Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today. Before I introduce the webinar, I just want to mention that we have closed captioning available today. You can alter the size of those captions by clicking on the CC button at the bottom of your screen. So my name is Yvonne Halpin. I'm the National Delegate and one of two national contact points based within the Irish Marie Skłodowska-Curie office, or the IMSCO for short. The IMSCO is supported by the Irish Research Council and operated under a partnership with the Irish Universities Association. And our mission is to support the research community in Ireland across all disciplines and all sectors in both applying for MSCA funding and implementing MSCA projects. And we do this in a number of ways, including promoting MSCA programs through information sessions and webinars, just like this one, through workshops, and indeed by providing more hands-on support, such as tailored consultancy and pre-review of proposals which are being coordinated or led by an Ireland-based organisation. So you're all very welcome to this webinar today on the European Union's Marie Skłodowska-Curie Actions Doctoral Networks funding call. And the Doctoral Networks used to be known as ITN under Horizon 2020, so some of you may be familiar with that terminology, but under Horizon Europe, the action has been rebranded. The 2023 Doctoral Networks call will open on the 30th of May, and today's webinar is for staff from both academic and non-academic organisations, and we're really delighted to have so many of you with us this morning. There will be a Q&A session after the presentation, so I invite you to post any questions you may have into the Q&A function, and we will address as many of those as we can. And just to say thanks to those of you who have already submitted questions during the registration process. And also my colleague, Dr. Jane Carrigan, who is a fellow national contact point for the MSCA in Ireland. She'll be placing some helpful resources into the chat function as we go through the webinar. And the webinar will be recorded and it will be made available through our website, and to all those who've registered, you will receive a link to the recording when it is ready. So that brings us to our guest speakers for today, and we're delighted to be joined by a very distinguished panel, which includes Dr. Julian Giordani from the Research Executive Agency in the European Commission. And we will then have Dr. Jean Kennedy from Devonish, who's the first of our case studies. And following that, we'll have the second case study presented by Professor Jean Jackson and Dr. Helen Lynch, both from University College Cork. So we'll begin with our first speaker. So Julian, I'll invite you to turn on your camera and you can share your slides while I give you a brief introduction. So Julian joins us from the Doctoral Networks Unit in the Research Executive Agency in the European Commission. And after obtaining a PhD in human genetics, he joined the Nanotechnology Unit of DG RTD in the European Commission. Following this, in 2009, Julian joined the Research Executive Agency in the Security Research Unit before joining the MSCA ITN unit in 2016 as a panel coordinator for the European Industrial Doctorates, followed by a panel coordinator for life science, and currently as a call coordinator for the doctoral networks for the last 2 years. So it's very clear that Julian has a lot of experience in this area, and we're very grateful for your participation today. So Julian, I will hand over to you.
Thank you, Yvonne. Good morning, everyone. Well, yeah, it's still morning for you. So good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me well and that you can see my slide. So I'm going to give you a presentation about the doctoral network, so the successor of ITNs back in H2020, and highlighting also the differences, the novelties for the next call, the 2023 call. So this is, and of course, Yvonne also has a slide, so I assume that they will be available to you after the meeting. So basically, the MSCA work program, so MSCA, it's not only about doctoral networks, it's also postdoctoral fellowship, staff exchange, a bunch of other things. And basically, this is centered about human capital development, basically. So researchers training, skills and career development. This is a bottom-up scheme, so in the excellence pillar, and it tries to foster international, cross-sectorial, interdisciplinary mobility. So basically, if I would have to summarize quickly what are doctoral networks, and apologies for those who know that by heart now, That's basically one consortium composed of universities, research centers, SMEs, industries. And this consortium will propose an overall coherent research project and a number of individual PhD research projects that are interlinked and in coherent with the overall research project for PhD students that they will recruit in the future. So once the project starts, then they will start recruiting the fellows. The idea about these doctoral network programs is that they should have benefits both for the doctoral candidates, so the PhD you're going to recruit, and the participating organizations. And the idea is to train creative, entrepreneurial, innovative doctoral candidates to face current and future challenge, convert knowledge and ideas into products and services, expose the researchers, so that the fellows, to the academic and the non-academic sectors. The idea is to train them through research and also through other types of more formal training, let's say, and also through secondments to really foster their long-term employability. So within the academia, but also outside of academia. So the focus is on research, of course, but also on transferable skills. So let's say non-technical skills, secondments, career development plans, supervision, and of course, through the network, more cooperation and knowledge transfer between the sectors and the disciplines. So the whole idea is to strengthen Europe human capital base in research and innovation by training these structural candidates, improve the attractiveness of the careers in research in Europe through better working and employment conditions, knowledge circulation. There's a big, mobility is a big thing in MSCA. Establish sustainable collaboration between academic and non-academic organizations, and also fosters a culture of open science. Open science is basically not only for MSCA, but for the all of Horizon Europe. So diving into more detail. So doctoral networks, as I said before, those are multi-beneficiary actions, so consortia, and these networks, they set up doctoral programs. So there are 3 flavors of it. We call it types of actions or modes, but the official term is type of action. So you have the standard doctoral network. You have the doctoral networks industrial doctorates, so the DNIDs, which have a strong focus on the industry, as the name suggests. And you also have the joint doctorates. I will spend more time on this later. But the one thing that's important for you to note is that contrary to H2020, all the 3 modes compete within the same scientific panel. So basically, when you submit a proposal, you're going to have to choose one scientific panel in which to submit it. And within this scientific panel, let's say life science, for instance, all the doctoral networks, the DNIDs and the DNJDs will compete against each other. So there's no dedicated budget or goal for industrial doctorates or for joint doctorates. In specifics, for 2023, now the size is the same for all the types of actions. So DN, DNIDs, and DNJDs, you can request up to 540 person month for all the implementation modes, right? So that's last year, it was limited to 360 for doctoral networks, the standard ones. Now it's 540. The program duration is max 48 months for the standard doctoral network and the DNIDs, but it's maximum 60 months for DNJDs. And the reason for that is that starting from the 2023 call, you will be able to request a maximum of 48 months of contract for a fellow only for DNJDs. So whereas it still stays between 3 and 36 months of contract duration for the standard DN and the industrial doctorates, you can go up to 48 months for DNJDs, but only for those. These fellows, they can go on secondment. It's actually encouraged. They can go wherever, so through between the beneficiaries and the associated partners. A little more on that later. And there's a cap to that. They can go up to 1/3 of their fellowship duration in secondment for the standard DN. So for 36 months, it means they can go for 12 months. But there is no limitation for industrial doctorates or joint doctorates. So they can go above this 1/3 fellowship duration secondment. For industrial doctorate, there are some additional eligibility conditions. So each fellows need to spend at least 50% of their time in the non-academic sector. So it can be, so they will be in the non-academic and in the academic, and both sectors can be in the same country. That's not a problem. This 50% they have to spend in the non-academic sector. It could be either in a non-academic beneficiary or a non-academic associated partner. More on that later. And what's also mandatory is that both academic and non-academic organizations jointly supervise the fellow that they will recruit. For joint doctorates, the idea is to have fellows enrolled in joint, double, or multiple PhDs delivered by entities located in at least 2 member states or associated countries. So when you set up a joint doctorate, basically the idea is that at the end, you endeavor to have joint multiple or joint double or multiple PhDs for each and every fellow in the project. And you will have to submit a letter of pre-agreement to deliver the joint double or multiple degree, and that's in the submission template. You'll see it when you submit your proposal. You will also need to have joint admission, selection, training, supervision, and governance of the fellows in the different entities that will compose their future joint, double, or multiple PhD. I talked about academic and non-academic. For us, the definition of academic and non-academic is, well, basically the non-academic sector is definition by exclusion. So whatever is not in the academic is it's not academic. So academic sector is public or private higher education establishment, public or private non-research profit organization, and international European research organizations. So I would just like to highlight that academic and non-academic has nothing to do with private or public, right? It's more about the profit or non-profit aspect of the institution. So a private non-profit research organization for us is in the academic sector. That's an important thing to note. I talked about joint, double, multiple degrees. You might already know that, but what we call joint or double or multiple degrees is a joint degree is a single diploma issued by at least 2 different academic institutions in 2 different countries and recognized officially. And the double or multiple degree is basically 2 or more separate diploma issued by 2 or more higher education establishment. All right. So that's the difference. And there's no, we have no preference over joint or double or multiple degrees. You are free to choose whatever you want in your application. In terms of eligibility, so these consortia, they need to abide to certain conditions. So the consortia need to have at least 3 independent legal entities, each of these entities established in a different EU member state or associated country. And from these 3, at least 1 has to be from an EU member state. Now, that's the minimum condition. Of course, you can go wider than that, and most applicants go wider than that, but this is the minimum that you need to have. All the beneficiaries, they have to recruit at least 1 doctoral candidate. It's an eligibility criterion. If you have 1 beneficiary in a project that does not recruit, that's not good. And they also have to host at their premises and supervise the researchers they recruit, or use associated partners linked to them to do so. In order to ensure a geographical distribution of the consortia, you should not have more than 40% of the EU contribution to beneficiaries of the same country. So for instance, if you have a consortium with 4 Irish entities, 1 French and 1 Spanish, you know, that won't do. You need to have to respect this 40% rule. There are some specific eligibility conditions for industrial and joint doctorates. I talked about that earlier. So the 50% stay in the non-academic sector for the industrial doctorate, the joint double or multiple degree enrollment and setup for the joint doctorate. And there are also resubmission restrictions. So if you submitted a proposal in 2020 to call and you scored below 80%, you cannot submit the same proposal in 2023. Who can apply? Any legal entity from anywhere in the world. So anyone can apply, but not all applicants are automatically eligible for funding. And for this, I advise you to consult, there will be a link at the end, to consult the Horizon Europe program guide, which spells out the countries that are automatically eligible for funding and the ones that are not. To make a long story short, third countries that are low to middle income country, they are automatically eligible for funding, but check the list. And the rich third countries basically are not automatically eligible for funding. So if you want to have a Japanese or a US entity in your consortium, they can participate, but they will not receive funding from us. So they could still benefit from being in the network, but they have to pay from other funds than the European Union funds. So you have consortia of universities, businesses, NGOs. There is no minimum or maximum number of associated partners. And I've been talking about associated partners, but what are those? So basically, there are two ways to participate in a doctoral networks. Either you're a beneficiary. Just to tell you that in the system, when you submit a proposal, beneficiaries are called partner, right? And associated partner are called associated partners. This is just a legal term because before you sign the grant agreement, you're not a beneficiary, you're a partner. But okay, it can be confusing sometimes, so I prefer to tell you now. But beneficiaries basically, as the name suggests, they benefit directly from the funds, from the EU funds. So they sign the grant agreement, they recruit the researchers, and they directly claim costs. Whereas the associated partners, they are an add-on, if you wish, to the project. They don't sign the grant agreement, they don't recruit the researchers, but they can still participate and organize training, for instance. They can propose to host secondments, they can participate in the supervisory board, they can do all sorts of activities within the project, but they don't directly claim costs to us. They can indirectly get funds from the institutional cost that you have. So if you have an entity that's an associated partner and that's going to organize, right now I'm inventing like a summer school somewhere, they can get this money from the pot of institutional costs that the consortium has, that the beneficiaries have. Eligible countries, basically, I already told you that before. I went a bit ahead of the slides. You have the EU countries, member states, that's clear. You have the non-EU countries, and the non-EU countries can be associated countries, or what I told you is the low and middle income countries, they're automatically eligible for funding. And you have the rich third countries that are not automatically eligible for funding. Not automatically, that means that during the evaluations, the evaluators will have to assess, if you have, let's say, a Japanese partner, a Japanese beneficiary, to assess whether their participation is crucial to the project. And in very exceptional cases, it could be that the evaluator say, yes, we can fund this rich third country institution, but that's more for very limited cases. For instance, they have access to some data that nobody else has access to, or not in Europe, things like that, really. This is a reminder of who are the associated countries. This is all in the Horizon Europe program guide. I always advise you to don't just download it, just go to the latest version all the time, because you know, associated countries, things could change. Just as a strong reminder, Switzerland is not an associated country. I mean, as opposed to H2020, it's not an associated country. And well, yes, it's a rich third country. So, but now about researchers, who are the eligible researchers, or the fellows that you will recruit later on? So they have to be doctoral candidates. So that's the condition, they should not already be in a position of a doctoral degree at the date of the recruitment. They have to undergo mobility. So this is the whole of MSCA is based on mobility, so they should not have resided or carried out the main activity in the country where they are recruited for more than 1 year in the last 3 years, right? And that's valid at the recruitment date, okay? If they are seconded then to the country where they've been spending more than 12 months, that's fine. It's really when they are recruited. They have to be recruited following an open, merit-based and transparent recruitment procedure, and that's important. It's an eligibility criterion, and that can be audited. I prefer to tell you that. So that means that's the ads for recruiting them, they have to be published widely, internationally, at least on your access, and you have to be able to show that there were no funny business when you chose the persons that you recruited in the end. One thing that's important is that the researchers must be enrolled in the doctoral program. This I told you already, but in at least one EU member state or associated country, and at least 2 for joint doctorate. Why am I telling you that? That's because you can have a third country automatically eligible for funding, but that means that the fellow, let's say South Africa, it's possible that an entity from South Africa participates to get funding, but their fellow would have to be enrolled in a PhD in a member state or associated country. So it's important for you to know that, because it's not always clear, and it brings about additional difficulties for these entities and these fellows. This is an overview of the eligibility. I will not read that, but you will have the slides. That's just a big summary. One thing that I didn't say yet is that from 2023, associated partners do not need to submit a letter of commitment anymore, right? So they have to, you need to explain in the proposal what they're going to do. You need to add them in the part A of the proposal as associated partner, but they don't need to send to attach a letter of commitment, not anymore. In terms of funding, it's rather straightforward. So we have a unit cost funding mechanism. So that means that for 1 month, 1 person month of doctoral candidate, you get 1 unit of cost. So that means that if you recruited a fellow for 36 months, you will get 36 times the unit, and it's reimbursed 100%. And this unit is divided in 2 cost categories, the researcher's cost and the institutional cost, and that's what it looks like. So you have on the left side what has to go to the researcher, so all of it has to go to the fellow. So you have the living allowance, which is a salary, the mobility allowance that all of them should get because they had to undergo mobility to start their project, the family allowance if applicable, and then you have special allowances in case of long-term leave or special needs, but this is something special. And the rest of it is the institutional unit contribution. So this is basically the funds to run the project. So, consumables, organizing training, computer time, whatever. So this 1,600 and 1,200. And basically this, you should not see it as you have for 1 fellow 2,800 per month to run the project. This is something that you can decide within the consortium to redistribute the way that you see fit and the way that's better for the project to run, right? So typically the coordinator would have maybe more costs for management, maybe some entities need more money for organizing trainings or hosting secondments. This is also through these funds that you can fund the associated partners if they organize trainings or things like that. About the evaluation criteria, so I guess you all know that, but just to repeat that, the evaluation process, basically each proposal is first assessed by 3 independent experts on their own. They don't know who the other experts are, and they write their own individual evaluation report. And from that, when they've done that, Then they sit together in a consensus and they have to agree amongst themselves. So they can also change their mind, listening to the arguments of the others. They have to agree on the consensus report. And the consensus is basically the consensus view on the comments, so strengths and weaknesses that you receive, and the score. So they all agree together, and this is the outcome of the evaluation. Basically, okay, this is we receive the proposal, we check eligibility, then we have the individual evaluation, the consensus group phase, and then at the end there's a panel where experts sit together and check the consistency of the evaluation across all the proposals. Those are the award criteria. So we have 3 criteria: excellence, impact, and quality and efficiency of the implementation. They have different weight. I'm not sure I pronounced weight correctly, but you got my meaning. And these criteria are divided in sub-criteria. So there's a score per criterion. There's not a score per sub-criterion, but all the sub-criterion have to be addressed, and they compose the criterion. How to apply? Well, you go to the funding and tender opportunities portal, and this is where you can apply starting from the 28th of May, if I'm not mistaken. Just pay attention that there is a new template, nothing drastic, but a few changes here and there. It will not affect the core of your proposal, but be mindful to use the latest template. It's not there yet. It will be there in a couple of days. It's ready, but yeah, bear that in mind. And basically, just a couple of advice. Read carefully the work program, the guidance documents, use the proposal template, use the latest one, read the evaluation form, and don't underestimate any part of the proposal. So as I said, there are 3 criteria, and all of them, it's such a competitive program that you really need all of them to be excellent. We advise you also to perform an internal peer review with your consortium partner about your proposal, to consult your national contact points. And yeah, think like an evaluator, write for an evaluator. What would you, if you were an evaluator, how would you assess your proposal with the award criteria that I told you about? There's a bunch of resources available for you. You can click on these links at your own pace after the meeting. Just one last call for you. If you're interested to work as an expert for the evaluations, well, obviously, if you submit a proposal, we will not hire you as an expert for the current call, but you can register. You have to register there in order for us to consider you. So I invite you, all of you who's interested, to apply, so that maybe one year we work with you during the evaluation. And that was my final slide. I hope I did not talk too much.
Thank you, Julian. No, you are ahead of schedule, so thank you for that. Much
good.
Appreciated. And that was a really comprehensive overview of the Doctoral Networks call. So thank you for that, and hopefully you have helped us pique the interest of our audience here today. So we will hold questions until the panel Q&A session a little later on, but please do keep entering your questions into the Q&A. We've had a couple of questions in the chat, and we've tried to answer them ourselves as we go. So for now, we'll move on to the first of our 2 case studies. So Jean, I'll invite you to share your screen now. So that's Jean Kennedy. So Dr. Jean Kennedy is Director of Devonish's Global Innovation Centre at Douth in County Meath in Ireland. She is a Royal Society entrepreneur in residence at Queen's University Belfast, and Jean has held the positions of Food Innovation Manager, at Devonish Nutrition, EU Regulatory Affairs Manager at Altec, and Food Safety and Consumer Insights Manager at the European Food Information Council. Jean has worked in the Food Safety Authority of Ireland, Michigan State University, and University College Dublin. And Jean is here today to tell us about Devonish's participation in an MSCA ITN. So Jean, thank you very much for joining us today, and I'll hand over to you now.
Thanks very much, Yvonne. So the case study I'm going to tell you about today is our Marie Curie project called Heartland. But first, just a word about who we are, because it is relevant in terms of the why and why we got involved with this Marie Curie project. So Devonish is founded in the UK and Ireland with sites across the globe. Our team of nutritionists use science and technology to ensure the most effective and efficient utilisation of nutrients in the production of food. We specialise in sustainable food solutions. We lead pioneering research and development in response to consumer demand for safe, nutritious and sustainably produced food. Our strategic focus is One Health from soil to society, meaning that we are interested in a whole system approach. That means the health of the soil, the health of the plant or sward, the health of the animal, the health of humans, and environmental health, and taken together as a whole, as I said. So Heartland is an acronym for Health, Environment, Agriculture and Rural Development, a trading network for land management. This is a European industrial doctorate. It was awarded in 2018. The other beneficiary in this programme with Devonish is Wageningen University in the Netherlands, but a really important partner who doesn't happen to be a beneficiary is University College Dublin. We have PhD students registered in both Wageningen and UCD. We have we started out indeed with 5 PhD students from Brazil, Argentina, Belgium, UK and Nigeria. Fantastic group of people. Unfortunately, Tarek from Brazil had to leave earlier in the programme, but nonetheless, the other 4 students are still they're actually in the writing up phase at the moment, having collected all the data required for this particular programme. We're based at the Devonish lands at Douth, about 25 minutes from Dublin Airport. It's part of the UNESCO World Heritage Site at Brunabanya. It's a really special site, and we've been incredibly fortunate that Devonish have dedicated 100 acres of this beautiful farm to conduct our research. And in fact, before the project was awarded in 2018, we had a lot of preparation work to do. When this farm was bought in 2013, there weren't fences, there weren't roadways or anything like that. So we had a huge amount of work to do. And indeed, there is a lot of archaeological interests on this site. So we had to be very careful around all of that, take that into consideration, as well as things that would impact on the research outcomes like soil fertility and access to infrastructure. So in the first instance, we developed this research platform. We looked at a randomized block design with 4 sward types, 4 replications of each. We had to put in more than 2 kilometres of roadway, address soil fertility issues, put in deer fencing, because indeed we have a resident herd of wild red deer in this valley. And in fact, keeping them out of our research plots was crucial to the success of the programme. We had to put in 12 kilometres of paddock fencing and indeed install a low stress animal handling facility. So a huge amount of preparation work done. Then in terms of the grassland experiment, we had to, in the first instance, remove all the old sward, cultivate the land, harrow and fertilise it, sow it, and ultimately we transfer the landscape from this to this. And this is a paddock with multi-species swards that in the experiment was co-grazed by cattle and sheep. You'll hear me using the term multi-species swards quite a lot through this short presentation. And I will say I have kept it short so that we can major on the Q&A later on. But the multi-species swards for us means a mixture of grasses, legumes and herbs. And they're all chosen specifically to suit the characteristics of the site, and also chosen because the legume component in the sward mix, they take nitrogen out of our nitrogen-rich atmosphere and they fix it in the soil. And that's really important because that means that we don't have to put on as much chemical nitrogen. And you'll see this coming through on the slides that I'm going to present in just a couple of minutes. The herbs have been chosen because of various reasons, like mineral density and fermentic properties. That means anti-parasitic properties and deep roots and other things. So in our first experiment, we set out 84 small plots, 3 by 10 meters, with 4 different sward types, with a permanent pasture. So that's the pasture that's been on this site for decades. Monoculture perennial ryegrass, which is the typical grassland type in this country. Really good for lots of reasons, highly productive and resilient and whatnot, but very hungry for nitrogen. And then 2 multi-species sward mixes, a 6 multi-species sward and 12 multi-species sward. We tested establishment methods like direct drill and conventional cultivation, and then different proportions of organic and inorganic fertilizer, and they were cut in a simulated grazing routine. The variables we looked at from those small plots were dry matter yield, herbage quality, the inputs, as I just described, botanical composition and persistency, earthworm abundance and diversity, and water infiltration rates. Our second experiment was about co-grazing cattle and sheep together at 2 livestock units per hectare. And on the permanent pasture, we included 135 kilos of nitrogen per hectare per year. This is the recommended rate. On the perennial ryegrass, we included 170 kilos of nitrogen. And importantly, on the multi-species wards, we only included 70 kilos of nitrogen. And our hope was that we would produce as much dry matter from the lower nitrogen inputs on the multi-species wards. And what we looked at, the variables we wanted to investigate here were animal performance, parasitic burden, methane emissions, inputs, and meat quality. So I want to share with you a couple of the results we have to date. As I said, the students are still analysing their data and really focusing on getting their papers out at the moment. So this is only a tip of the iceberg for now, but enough to get the message across. And one of the things that we get most that people find most appealing when they come to see what we're doing on this farm, because we have a huge amount of people coming through to see what we're doing, is the soil. So under the monoculture perennial ryegrass, it's really evident that even though this is a really excellent example, it's more compacted and there is much shallower roots in this soil sample. Whereas in the multi-species wards, the roots are much more complex, different root lengths, particularly with the herbs, and indeed absolutely laden down with earthworms. We found 300% more earthworms in the multi-species sward soil, and 600% more deep burrowing earthworms, just as an indicator. And in terms of water infiltration, the soil under the multi-species wards infiltrated water 14 times faster. So that has real implications that we'll come to in just a second. But in terms of soil organic matter, at the deeper soil depths, so at 30 centimeters, for example, we found that there was more carbon being stored deeply under the multi-species wards. And this has real implications in terms of, upcoming discussions on carbon markets and whatnot. And in terms of the yield under the multi-species wards, with 60% less nitrogen, we got, depending on the year, between 20 and 40% more dry matter. So our hopes and expectations were far exceeded. And not only that, but in the drought conditions, this was even more evident. So this slide is from the summer of 2020, when in fact we did have soil moisture deficits for a couple of weeks that summer. And during that period, you can see that the multi-species wards really outperformed the perennial ryegrass and the permanent pasture. But it was so visual. you could see the paddocks with the permanent pasture and perennial ryegrass were yellow and scorched, whereas the multi-species wards were green and lush. So it was evident even just, you know, by observation. In terms of animal performance, the cattle are performing a 20% higher average daily gain, and similarly for the lambs. And what's really impactful for farmers is that the lambs are ready for market about 50 days earlier on average. So that's got huge positive environmental and economic consequences. So I suppose the take-home messages for this project are that in terms of the soil, it's improved structure, improved earthworm abundance and diversity, improved water infiltration rates. In terms of the sward, we're getting more from less nitrogen and better quality. I haven't shown you the quality results on the herbage, but we have those and we know that it's better on multi-species swards. In terms of the animal performance, improved average daily gain, reduced days to slaughter, better health. Haven't shown you those results either, just to get through this material efficiently, but indeed there was lower parasitic burden, and indeed the animals were less stressed. In terms of the human piece, we have found that the meat from the multi-species swards has improved nutritional quality. It's not to the level of that a claim could be put on front of the pack. That would be fantastic if it was, because you could really communicate clearly to the consumer at point of sale. It's not to that level, but it is of improved nutritional quality. And indeed, looking at only the reduced fertilizer inputs and the reduced days to slaughter, only those two things, not talking about soil carbon or methane reduction, just looking at those two things, we found a 26% reduced carbon footprint. So that's really, really significant. So in terms of our, you know, my thoughts on the programme in general and recommendations for other industry partners to get involved, I would say that if the proposal and the programme aligns with who you are and what you do, then it's a really, really excellent programme. For us, I mentioned that our strategic vision is one health from soil to society. So what this Heartland programme has done is actually put the evidence base into our vision of one health. So that's it for me, and I think suffice to just thank the IUA, thank the Marie Curie programme, and indeed to our partners, UCD, Wageningen University, and all the students involved, as well as others, no doubt, that I've forgotten to mention. So thank you.
Thank you, Jean. That was great. Thank you. We had a comment in the chat that it looks like a really beautiful place to work, and I absolutely agree. But one thing that struck me from listening to your presentation is the kind of the multifaceted impacts that have come from the ITN for the company, for your academic to non-academic collaborations with Wageningen, and for the PhD students. It's very clear there's environmental impacts, societal impacts, and then hopefully economic impacts for Devonish as well. So thank you for sharing your experience. So over now to our second case study. So Helen, I'll invite you to share your screen and you can get set up there. So this case study will be presented by both Jean Jackson and Helen Lynch. And Jean is a professor in occupational science and occupational therapy at University College Cork. Jean's research focuses on how daily occupations such as play are essential to health and well-being for people across the lifespan. And Dr. Helen Lynch is a senior lecturer and qualified occupational therapist in UCC with extensive experience in paediatric services, having worked in the area for 20 years. Helen completed her PhD in social sciences from the Dublin Institute of Technology, exploring physical play environments in the homes of infants under 2. And Helen joined UCC in 2004 as a full-time lecturer and director of the Brookfield Occupational Therapy Clinic. So both Professor Jackson and Dr. Lynch are co-PIs on the MSCA P for Play ITN, which we will hear about now. So a really totally different area of research, but we very much look forward to hearing about your experience so far. So a very warm welcome to you both. And I believe I'll hand over to Jean first.
Thanks, Yvonne.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, good morning or afternoon. I'm Professor Jeannie Jackson, and Helen Lynch, Dr. Helen Lynch is at the bottom of the screen, or at least the bottom of my screen. And as was said, we are the principal investigators for the MSCA ITN P for Play grant. In the next 15 minutes, we will briefly introduce P for Play, giving a snapshot of the training and research that we're conducting through the project and how they impact the network. Second, we're going to highlight the benefits and added value of the interdisciplinary and intersectorial aspects of the program. Third, we're going to describe the benefits of the ITN for the profession of occupational science, the future of occupational therapy, and University College Cork. And we're going to end with some tips for you as future candidates. And I just realized that I said ITN about 3 times, and we just said you had changed that, but that shouldn't matter. Next. Okay. So to introduce the P for Play, Helen, myself, and our colleagues were awarded a Horizon 2020 grant. We received $2.2 million to design and develop a 3-year European joint PhD program in occupational science across 4 universities. The grant provided funding for employment of 8 early stage researchers were already qualified as occupational therapists. And a unique feature of this type of MSc action is that it required the establishment of a new discipline in Europe, academic discipline, and that what is occupational science, along with a strong line of research, which in our case was play disparities. Next. Gotta make sure I'm with you. Okay, aligning with the best practices for developing PhDs in Europe, the students who graduate from our program will receive their PhDs from 2 of the 4 universities, thus enriching their academic experience. And you have here the 4 different universities, the 2 of us and Brian Boyle from Ireland, Professors Maria Peraltowicz, Maria Larsson-Lund, and Margareta Lilja from Sweden, Doctors Sarah Cantartis and Duncan Pendleton from Scotland in the United Kingdom, and Dr. Christina Schultz in Switzerland. And with that, I'll give it to Helen.
Thanks, Jeannie. I suppose for our presentation, we wanted to prioritize a bit more on the sort of the experiences of making this application more than focusing on our research, given that many of us have different research backgrounds. Nonetheless, one of the tips or experiences for us was that we did come together, a core group of us initially through a cost action project called LUDI, which was around play for children with disabilities. And building on that, initial meeting, a group of us had started to work on some deliverables and documents and realized we would be a good match to further work on a grant together. So at the same time, when we were working on the grant together, we also realized we were in a very fortunate position that there were a number of European level organizations that we could also find out or gain more insights around the need and the gap. So we were able to identify the need for a PhD in occupational science in Europe because the COTEC organization, the Committee of European OTs, does a review every year and was able to prove that only 5 countries in the whole of Europe actually were providing PhDs for OT, occupational therapy, and the European Network of Therapists in Higher Education confirmed that there was no PhDs at all in occupational science. So overall, there's a huge gap in the academic sector in Europe, much more than in the industry sector, which was particularly unique for our discipline. The outcome of our application was we were successful in our first attempt, which we know is not very common. So we're very happy to be able to say that. Just to give you some idea again, we know there's 7 categories in it, and we were applying under social sciences. In the year we applied, there were over 1,500 applicants. I think 120 were successful that year, but only 12 of those were in the social sciences, and of those, only 2 were EJDs, were joint doctoral programs. So it really gives you a sense of the scope and scale of this, I think. And this is the spreadsheet that came out that year. So you can see the overall numbers and the overall scores across each of the sections. So as Julian was saying earlier, we have 2 strands in the joint doctoral programs. We have to design a program, an educational program, and also design a research program at the same time. So our first challenge was trying to figure out this design of the PhD program, because with 4 universities across 4 different countries, there are hugely divergent ways of thinking about PhDs. In UCC, this was what we would call a thematic PhD, because it required a lot more modules within the design of the program. When we compared our 4 universities, the minimum that Sweden would accept for coursework was 60 credits of ECT. So we had to design a joint program that all our students would undertake that had a minimum of 60 course credits. So this gives you an idea of what that looks like. And because of UCC's requirements, the requirement to spread that out over 3 years so that they do 20 credits each year. But we have those generalizable, transferable skills in there for coursework, and in the core network level skills or modules on occupational science and play as well. Parallel to that, as we said, was the need to design a whole research program that was very coherent and was very clear to reviewers in some way, and yet could contain distinctive projects within them. So this was our design, and this was the image that we submitted on our grant application also, that it was interconnected 8 projects on the 4 Ps for play: people, place, policy and practice, which is where we got the acronym, with 8 projects, 200 people, 2 for place, 2 for policy and 2 for practice. And then, because you can feel even in that, or thinking about play and inclusion for children, and this wasn't just children with disabilities, it was for children at risk of play deprivation due to migrancy, due to poverty, any area at risk, based on Article 31 of the Rights of the Child. We needed a lot of industry partners that actually work in this area. So our interdisciplinary piece comes in a lot more here then, because we ended up with 15 partners, 8 of whom provide placements for each of our 8 students, and the others, and then combine with others to provide training, and are members of an advisory group for us also on the delivery and the design of this new educational program. So we have 6 EU countries represented here, 2 institutions from North America, and we have 2 European level organizations within this network. Benefits then, if we start to think of benefits, this was taken initially from the review of ITNs at the end of Horizon 2020, some of the elements that have been found across the range of programs, but for us, we can confirm for our students that already we're seeing this building of capacity, for example, in research, education and supervision. Because for us, for example, in UCC, we have 4 staff members with PhDs only. We're a very small department. So to be able to deliver undergraduate and postgraduate and PhD programs is a huge demanding task, but together we're able to do this way more effectively. So for us, it really builds our capacity. The joint international and interinstitutional educational program that we've been able to design together and deliver together has been immensely possible now because of this program. The joint enrollment and joint supervision, we are learning so much from each other that it's been, again, that capacity building for us. For the students, though, the multicultural exposure of them, their increased international collaborations already, because they are building the relationships with the partners through their research and study, and then the amplification that we're able to do from multiple research environments has been fantastic. So I think I forgot to say we employed 8 students, but we had 100 applicants and interviewed 48 of those, and ended up with 8 students from obviously 8 different countries. Some of the barriers or points just to flag and our insights so far at the program level has been, again, that diversity and quality assurance that across the institutions that we had to address a lot in the first year prior to the students coming on board. And this is because of a lot of discrepancies or diversity in the qualification framework interpretations internationally. Program level content, the occupational science knowledge of incoming students, we needed to find our feet with that because of the lack of international education in this field. As we're living with it now, the students are into their third year, we're realizing also this difference we hadn't expected around the thesis by monograph, which is more common in social sciences in our experiences. However, in our institutions, partners, some of them work by a thesis by publication. So, and then of course the 3-year funded program versus the 4 to 6 years that our different institutions more typically have. Additional benefits, though, we've been, for us in particular, for our discipline, we've been able to, because of funding, to develop a model of excellence for doctoral education for occupational science and occupational therapy in Europe, which we would not have been able to do without Marie Skłodowska-Curie support. Due to the requirements, we have designed projects aligned to the Sustainable Development Goals. So we really are working on addressing societal challenges for equality and inclusion and community and for children with a whole range of diverse needs. And then the knowledge gain for society is really achieved by this whole Marie Skłodowska-Curie commitment to open science and the democratization of research as a fundamental requirement. So just to finish up with a few tips and tricks, perhaps, for future applications, if you're interested. I think everybody's been saying this, but to start the application early, we did start 2 years in advance because we were doing initial planning sessions together in our Ludi Cost Action prior to building our consortium then and working through then on our actual research focus. Seeking insight from other successful applicants is really very helpful despite the differences in the types of research we might be doing. Attending the MSCA office presentations like this and meeting with the national contact point, which we did on a number of occasions. Accessing the Enterprise Ireland funds was really helpful because that was the last few months of actually drafting the grant proposal, and having funding to access formal review of the proposal at that stage was really, really useful. Research strand to identify from early on your project and your research and how it fits with your individuals, co-supervisors across the universities, because we as a group of 9 people had quite a range of research topics, and needing to kind of mesh that into a coherent research program was important. But also the educational strand to align the university PhD programs to identify the design elements that align or compete and what are the common denominators that we can all live with. So to use every support you can access in writing the application, be clear and concise, draw from the EU documents, use tables, figures and images to enhance your communication of your proposal. Because overall your plan must be cohesive and congruent, and that the individual research projects must stand alone, yet connect to a coherent whole. And here are some of the documents that we would have drawn from initially around the excellence in PhD education. But to consider how to pitch your research argument so it's understandable, yet not oversimplified, because it's likely that the reviewer is not going to be a subject-specific expert. The application needs to convince reviewers that it's necessary, that the educational programme has been given equal attention to the research programme, and that the proposal has the right team to be able to implement it. So we must also then clearly demonstrate that we can contribute to scientific and societal impact. So just as a final slide, really, we didn't realise till we were in our early months of having been grant approved that we didn't really understand the background offices within our university well enough, because we should have talked to them prior to even submitting our proposal. To do with the Registrar's Office, the Graduate Studies and the International Offices, because there were a number of agreements we needed to develop actually with our partners, like joint agreements with the paired universities, as well as a memorandum of agreement, the consortium agreement and the grant agreement. So that's a bit of, I think, useful advice now that we think back on it, that we would recommend for people to think about. So thank you. For further information, if you want to contact us, please do. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Helen and Jeannie. That was really great advice. And I think those very practical tips are really welcome, particularly around the setting up of the joint doctoral networks. I think that can be a bit daunting for applicants when they first approach that. And thank you as well. I know you mentioned Enterprise Ireland support, and my colleague Jane has popped a link in there to the chat function. So there is financial support available for applicants from higher education institutions in Ireland who want to coordinate or lead a doctoral network submission. And your research office within your higher education institution will be able to offer some more advice there. So thank you as well to all our speakers and for being very punctual with your presentations. I'll invite you to join me now and to turn on your cameras for our Q&A session. So thank you to those who submitted questions during registration. We have a few of those, and I'll start with some of them. We received a couple of questions through the Q&A, which we'll bring as well. But please do feel free to continue to raise some questions in the chat. So Julian, I might start with you. I know you mentioned in your presentation that there is a resubmission rule, and it's a question I guess we often get asked by applicants, particularly as the resubmission restrictions are new under Horizon Europe as well. So if you could just clarify, I guess, what constitutes a resubmission in a doctoral network, and then linked to that, we've also been asked a question about the probability of success for resubmissions. If you have anything to comment on that, like, are they typically more successful than a new proposal? Obviously, that's a kind of big generalization. There's always caveats, but if you could comment on those, that'd be much appreciated.
Right. So indeed, resubmission restrictions are new in Horizon Europe. That was part of the demand management side of things that would allow to have a bigger success rate, because the success rate is rather low in for doctoral networks, is a bit higher than for ITNs, but it's still quite low. So basically, there's no official definition of what a resubmission is for the moment. We are working on that. It takes a bit of time because it has to go through the work program and everything. So maybe next year or the year after, there will be something more robust. But for the moment, it's any proposal that is similar in its scope and consortium as the one that was previously submitted. So in practice, what happens is that when you submit a proposal, you have to declare whether you had submitted a similar proposal in the past, and you have to put the proposal number from the previous evaluation. So when you do that, obviously we're going to check what was the score of the previous proposal and check if it was below 80%. We also have tools. I mean, it's not rocket science tools. It's just comparing text to check the similarity content. So we can also, even if you don't declare it, we can check whether the proposal is very similar to a previous one. And what will happen is that for 2023, we will basically go back to the applicants if we identify a proposal that seems very similar to a previous one, and we will ask the applicants to explain or justify in which way the new proposal is significantly different than the previous one. Mm-hmm. So that's basically how it is. So it's kind of a in between, because we don't have, for postdoctoral fellowship, it's easier because it's one beneficiary, one fellow. For us, it's a consortium, so its definition is a bit harder. We'll come up with something, but not for 2023. So yeah, I'm not sure to which extent this is a suitable helpful answer, but yeah, that's what we deal with at the moment. Yeah, how we deal with it.
Thank you. And are you aware of any statistics about the probability of success for resubmissions, or even anecdotal evidence that you may know yourself?
Not really. I mean, I haven't done these statistics. It's an interesting thing. I could do it. Obviously not now within half a minute, but anecdotal, as you say, I mean, it would stand to reason that some resubmissions have a higher chance of success, but as you say, it's generalization. There's a lot of caveats with that. But I can tell you that there are still many applications that succeed the first time. Mm-hmm. There are also applications that are submitted, resubmitted again, and that keep failing. So I cannot really tell you. I would assume, of course, if you resubmit a proposal, of course, is a good advice. The obvious advice is always, of course, to look at the weaknesses of your previous proposal in the evaluation summary report and try to fix it, of course. That's, I mean, you don't need me to tell you that, of course, but
yeah, and on that, I think the advice we generally give to applicants who are going to, let's say, who can legally resubmit a proposal who's scored over 80%, we advise people to treat it like a new proposal, in the sense that it is a brand new evaluation, a brand new set of experts in the evaluation period. It's not the same people who've reviewed it before. Of course, take note of the weaknesses, but approach the entire proposal again and rewrite the entire proposal again, acknowledging those weaknesses, particularly because time has moved on. The state of the art may have slightly changed, those kind of things. And I think we've seen where people have actually fallen down by just addressing the particular weaknesses. And just to stay with you for another moment, Julie, if you don't mind, on a very practical level, on that note as well about resubmissions, could you explain just how they are reviewed? And what I mean is, it's our understanding that if a proposal is resubmitted, they'll tick resubmission, and so it's known in the Research Executive Agency that it's a resubmission. But our understanding is that it is evaluated as a new proposal in its own right. But could you clarify whether the previous proposal or the previous evaluation summary report comes into the evaluation process at any point, and if it does, at what point, and what kind of impact can it have on the scores?
Yes, indeed. So we have a process for resubmissions, and basically the process is, as you said, each proposal is evaluated as a standalone in its own right by the new set of evaluators, and the previous evaluation should not unduly influence the current evaluation. So what we do is that we let the three experts do their individual report, without, they don't know anything else than the current proposal. Then we let them run the consensus meeting, and then, and only then, after they agreed on the comments and score, then we give them access to the previous ESR. So not the previous proposal, but the previous ESR. So the idea, of course, is not that the previous ESR should influence the current ESR, evaluation summary report, sorry for the acronyms, but it's, if you will, it's kind of an additional quality control mechanism. We tell the expert, listen, this proposal is a resubmission, please check the previous ESR, and if you see discrepancies or contradictions between the previous and the current, of course, they don't have the previous proposal. So the point is not to check whether the weakness was addressed or the strength is now a weakness, but the point is to thoroughly check the current ESR to be sure that there is no factual mistake. So to tell them, okay, I don't know, now I'm inventing something. If the dissemination was praised last time, but now it's not praised that much, please double check the dissemination action or dissemination activities, and check that it is really what you mean, that you really think it is what you think it is now. So it's an additional layer, but it's not comparing the proposal. So we have cases in which the experts said, different experts said something the last time, and the new expert might say something different. Yeah, that's how we do it.
I think some of that comes down to the nature of peer review as well, I think, but that's very helpful. Thank you.
Exactly. I mean, sometimes some experts might have seen something last time that they don't see this time, or, they come from they've seen the proposal from a different angle. Sometimes the state of the art might have changed. So could be that they were more generous last time, I mean, or more strict last time. Obviously, the consensus process is a good way to, address the individual biases that each evaluator would have, because, I mean, it's a human process. Humans have bias, even if we don't realize that. But, at least this ensures that, the biases are kind of counterbalanced by, the other biases.
Super, thank you. Julian, I might give you a break for a moment. And I have a question for Jean Kennedy. I might pull you in on this one. So just noting, obviously, Devonish is from the non-academic sector, and it in itself is not a PhD awarding body. So the PhD students recruited into the Heartland ITN obviously needed to be enrolled in a PhD program within an academic body. So just wondering if you could comment on the kind of process around that, if there were any maybe unforeseen challenges or benefits as well for either the company or the organizations or the students. And I guess, do you have any learnings that you could share about the process for other applicants who may be in the same situation?
Sure. So just straight away, I would describe it as nothing but a benefit and a good thing. So while myself and my colleague who are based in industry, obviously, you know, we've done PhDs, we've been through the process. Indeed, it's a long time ago. So we absolutely need the academics to keep us right in terms of ticking all the boxes in terms of the specific criteria for getting a PhD in those institutes, and those institutes being Wageningen University and UCD. But more than that, they've got skill sets and expertise that have been absolutely complementary and fundamental in the success of the program. So nothing but good. And they also gave us access in the early stages to their research offices. So that really did help, along with the help from your own office, Yvonne, the IOA. That was really important. In terms of learnings, for me, because we had 5 PhD students, and I'm saying only 5, it meant that we were restricted about how many academic partners we could have. I think if we had, I don't know if the rules are the same, but if we had 6 PhD students, we could have had Wageningen and UCD both as beneficiaries. And that actually dawned on me very late in the day. So that was a learning. Julian, you showed a slide there on the eligibility criteria. I wish I'd studied that and had a complete understanding of that earlier, because as I said, right up until fairly late on, we were planning to bring in both academic partners as beneficiaries.
Solid advice, Jean, about reading the work program and the eligibility criteria. Absolutely, because sometimes, you know, it's that one little sentence that might be in the middle of a paragraph, which is that clarification that you need. So thank you for sharing your experience there. Helen and Jeannie, I might come over to you. So we had a couple of questions come in through before this, and then there's also a question coming in the Q&A, which you could comment on. So I think, Helen, I might just come to you first. And it's a question kind of off the back of what you presented, and it's related, I guess, to the question which has come in the Q&A. You spoke about the process of setting up a joint PhD program, joint doctoral network with organizations across Europe. And I think, you know, myself and Jane, our experience is that when we talk to people, this can seem somewhat of a little bit of a black box for people in terms of how you even get started with setting up a joint PhD program, the administrative process, how long it takes, who you should talk to. And thank you, you mentioned some of the offices in your university. But I was just wondering if you could kind of comment a little bit, particularly I think about how long this really takes in reality to set up and to kind of reach agreements across the partners, because it's not just, you know, perhaps the academics involved, you've other offices in the universities. And the question that came in on the chat was whether you could both talk a little bit more about establishing a common or a joint PhD program across the different countries involved, and in terms of kind of students attending and training across different geographies. Was it in person? Was it online? And how do you balance it if some universities require structured PhD programs and others don't? How do you harmonize it?
Yeah.
Basically?
If I just
Good
go
question.
in my head, I'm thinking back to that image. So where we had all the pieces with year 1, 2, and 3, and we would have started off with the core agreement of establishing the core program in occupational science, which was a network program, which meant all students had to attend these modules, and a parallel program for play. And that was the design of that was because occupational science is at the core, and that will continue for sustainability, but the topic could be different next time. So we have 2 parallel network level programs that all students attend, and we had to write the modules for that and the descriptors, and they were all approved at the other universities or accepted. And then we had the localized training that was provided through each of our institutions that the students could access as electives. So that's the first piece. Jeannie, do you want to speak to the actual educational side of that, the occupational science design?
Oh, I don't know that I have anything to say about the design of it, other than we had to sit down and pull together how we thought this discipline that had started in the U.S. could actually work for Europe, and how it needed to be shifted and changed. But I was going to comment on the amount of time that you said it took, and it, for me, it was amazing amount of time to teach and to redo all the things that I had been doing for years, partially because it was in a new geography, new culture, and because you had to bring in all those different cultures of the people who were taking the classes, and then so that took time in and of itself.
Yeah.
But the other thing is the time it takes to actually get it agreed by the university, and that's what Helen was going into, all the different offices that have to say yes to it. And I know we got ours done in 6 months. That's what
The agreement,
it said.
yeah.
Yeah, we got the agreement, but we were probably on it every day, and most people don't. It's something that you almost want to do beforehand, but you can't. And the universities in Europe are quite different in terms of
So we were lucky in that our Swedish LTU Luleå University already had a document or procedure for dual awarding, dual PhDs. So we built on what we had and what we knew from each of our 4 institutions, and we also went through the process in UCC of establishing it as a full program approval process, which took about 18 months. So that was the work we would have done from the outset as soon as we knew the grant was approved.
Yeah.
So we're happy to talk to people about some of those steps if they want to talk later.
Yeah, the other comment I just have to throw in is is that we did it in COVID.
Yeah.
So that was like you go from teaching a classroom and then you go into teaching in COVID was quite different, and we had to be very creative very quickly. So that is something that we hope never will happen again. So
thank you. And I know in the proposals now in Doctoral Networks, if you want to join Doctoral Network, you have to actually submit this letter of pre-agreement between the organizations with the proposal, and that was brought in to accelerate, I guess, the discussions before a proposal is actually submitted. And Julian, am I right in saying it's part of the grant agreement that the joint PhD agreement should be signed within 6 months? Do I have that correct, at that timeline of the network starting?
Yeah, it's about right. Now, of course, we are aware that this can take a gigantic amount of time. So, I mean, we're still flexible if it's delayed a few months. But indeed, I mean, this is a really big challenge for the joint doctorate. I mean, it's usually the people who do that, they're very happy to have done it after the fact, but it's still a lot of work to set that up. Yes.
Yeah, and there is actually there is a report on European joint doctorates following an event that the European Commission ran, where they brought joint doctoral networks or joint ITNs, which had been funded. They brought them together to share best practices and to share challenges, that kind of thing. I think, Jane, if you can find it, you might pop the link to that report into the chat, but if not, we can send it out afterwards. Julian, I might come back to you if that's okay. There are a couple of practical questions which have come in. The first of those is whether there are latex templates available for the proposal templates, and what's the best source to get the official template.
Yes. So I actually saw the question, so I'm happy to reply now. Actually, to show you, it's easier if I share my screen just for
Sure.
a few minutes. This is, you see the funding and tender opportunities portal.
Yeah.
Put the right screen, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Good. So well, when you land there, you just, if you type DN in the search engine, you'll find the Doctoral Networks 2023, and actually the template is here now. So I said it would be in a couple of days, but that's something you might want to know. I didn't see it because I had not cleared my cache from my internet browser. So we have these cases sometimes that you still the old document because you haven't cleared your cache. So when I cleared it, now I could see it. So it was always there. So this is basically the page of the call. So it's not open yet. But when you go to topic conditions and documents and you scroll down, you have the standard application form. And if you click on that, then you have the latest template. So this is the latest templates, and you see there it's dated 18th of April 2023. So this is the latest template. Okay, you have the part A template. That's anyway something you do online, but then you have the, if you scroll down, then you have the part B template, and you see here the few changes that we've done. Nothing drastic, but there's a few things that we clarified just to make it easier. Just to take just one example, for instance, there was the role of the non-academic sector in the training. It was in two sections, actually, in section 1.4 and 2.1. So then, I mean, it was fine, but then we kept having to explain that you have to assess it only in 1 or 2. So we thought, okay, let's just take it out from 1.4. Now it's only 2.1. So those are these kinds of simplification. We learn from the evaluations every year, and we try to make it simpler as much as we can.
I think that will be welcome. Anywhere that applicants have a little bit more space, I think is always welcome in these proposals. And just a couple of other practical questions just while we're on it, Julian. There's a question come in: can an associated partner be a beneficiary, or is the category of beneficiary limited to degree granting institutions?
Well, so when an institution comes to a proposal, they have to decide whether they are beneficiary or associated partners, knowing that if they are a beneficiary, they have to recruit a fellow. Now, recruit a fellow and enroll a fellow are two different things. So you can, and we have that with non-academic institutions as beneficiaries, they cannot enroll a PhD in their institutions because they're not degree institutions, but the fellows can be enrolled in another institution in the consortium. Basically, beneficiary and degree granting are two different things. The beneficiary has to recruit, that's the thing. Now, there are some entities that, because it's simpler for them, because they don't want to recruit, or they decide to be there as associated partner, is kind of a softer way to participate in a project. And actually, during the lifetime of the project as well, it's possible to bring in an associated partner. If, for instance, you realize, oh, that would be fantastic to have such fellow go on secondment to this place somewhere. And it's a very easy process to just add an associated partner during the project. And then you can, send the fellow on secondment to this new entity. So that's pretty flexible.
Thank you. And one more practical question. Is there any requirement to be a coordinator in terms of career stage, and can early career researchers be the coordinator of a doctoral network? So I think this probably comes down to maybe a level of experience with managing these projects? I think I'll let you answer in a kind of the rules, Julian, I think, first.
Well, I mean, there is no formal requirement for, experience, but I have to be honest. I mean, the coordination is also a lot. It's also administration. So it has to be someone who has some experience in managing projects, large scale projects in case of doctoral networks, and is not afraid also to deal with administrative things. So it's not just about the science, it's also about the, the practical things, the administration, amendments, payments, stuff like that. So I would think that maybe it's not the most thrilling thing to do for a junior scientist, but that's just my own opinion, of course.
Yeah, and I think if the question has come in from someone within a higher education institution in Ireland, there's very likely other people who have led on these types of ITNs or doctoral networks, and so I think it'd be a good idea to see if you could talk to somebody if you're interested, and maybe partnering in one would be a good way to get started and to get your foot in the door. There was also a question which I might take quickly. Actually, it came in the Q&A. So typically in Ireland, PhDs will last about 4 years. And certainly national funding typically funds PhDs for 4 years. So there's a question that this seems to be in tension with the upper limit of 36-month fellowships for standard doctoral networks and industrial doctoral networks. And I think just to speak from, I guess, and I would ask Helen and Jeannie if you have any word on that, but I know institutions in Ireland kind of have different ways to handle this. For some cases, PhDs are kind of condensed into the 3 years. In other institutions, perhaps there's other additional funding for the 4th year of the PhD student within Ireland. So I think if this is something that you'd like to find out, I would say, again, talk to your institution if it has had doctoral networks before, to see how this is typically handled. I don't know, Helen or Jeannie, if you wanted to make any quick comment on that.
Yes, of course, it's come up as an issue because, especially with Sweden, where they have 5 years and we have 4 years max, are trying to negotiate through that. So in Sweden, they actually would have pulled together funding for the extra year. But we're aiming still for a 4-year end in that regard. And UCC, we have asked and got support that the fee would be waived for the final year as they progress now into a 4th year, which it looks like many of them will. But some will be done this year by the end of their 3rd year.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's very difficult to get it done by the end of the 3rd year, and that might be something that could be considered by Europe at all. How long do you give people to finish their PhD if you want them to take a thematic PhD or work with partners? If you do want this kind of partner coming together from the outside and the inside, the outside of the academia and the inside of the academia, then something has to move, and perhaps the amount of time to get your PhD could be lengthened, thus far allowing for really good secondments and really good PhDs. But that's not in my role to make that change.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that.
If I could just add to that, Yvonne.
Yes, please, yeah.
An industrial point of view, when you've got PhD students, based in the company, there is an expectation that the company will pick up the tab for the 4th year. It was just an expectation across the board. So it's not ideal. Even if the amount of money wasn't to change, but it could be accessed over a period of 4 years instead of 3 would be helpful, or something. But I would really like if it was considered going forward. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for that contribution. I know that there's so many differences across European member states in terms of durations and that kind of thing. And I think the 3-year PhD was something that was decided as part of the Bologna process a number of years ago at European Union level. But nonetheless, this feedback is really valuable, and we can take it back to our colleagues as well within the Commission. So I'm just conscious of time. I know there was a question on whether we've had a similar seminar for postdoctoral applicants. So there is the MSCA postdoctoral fellowships call, and we did run a webinar about a a month ago on that. Jane, if you have the link there, you might pop it in, but nonetheless, you can also find it via iua.ie/Marie Curie. So we've just come to 12:29. So I think that brings us to the end of our webinar. A very quick thank you to everyone for joining with us and for sticking with us till the end. I hope you found it very informative and useful. And I'd particularly like to thank our panelists for giving their time to share with us today. So quick reminder that the recording of today's webinar will be made available on iua.ie. You can follow up with myself and my colleague Jane if you have any queries or particular questions that we didn't get to. So for now, I will just wish you a very pleasant morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you might be around the world, and goodbye for now. I know Jane has popped up all our contact details into the chat as well, so you can find us there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.